Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
In golf, precision is everything, on and off the course. PGA of America chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business for smooth operations and seamless transactions. Together, we enhance ticketing and concessions for better fan experiences from gate to green. This is pro-level efficiency. This is PGA of America with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
I was in Cornwall last week. I had a lovely time. I went to Lanhydrock and I went to St Michael's Mount and Castle Drogo.
Castle Drogo.
Castle Drogo, man. Have you been there? Has anyone been there?
It's just got such a great name.
Castle Drogo. One does not simply walk into Castle Drogo. You have to follow the path. So I'm going to say it was built in the 1920s and 30s, designed by Lutyens, responding to his American patron's desire for a new castle. So it's this Art Deco castle with a sort of 1930s flat roof, as a result of which it's the water has been leaking in for the last 90 years, and it's just undergone a 9-year restoration process. But it's very peculiar. It's like when you walk into the main hall, it's these incredible Lutyens spaces. But none of the flagstones or the ramparts are worn down or old. Everything's basically as new. It's a very odd experience. And then within it, you've got these kind of country house rooms, these cozy little rooms within this castle environment. Yeah, it was brilliant. It was the sort of thing, as we said on Lot Listed, that Andy Miller would do, and he did do it. I did do it. It was really fun. Was really, really fun. David, where are you? You said you were in the country.
I am. I'm in a secret location that I can't divulge in the country.
Are you? Are you hiding out?
But it's my little bolt hole that we go to, and so I do genuinely not tell anyone where it is, really.
Brilliant.
No, I mean, it's in East Anglia. It's really nice. It's really lovely.
Broad enough for us.
Yeah, and it just kind of gives me a break from the mayhem of industrial television and the city.
It makes you seem so kind of elusive as well. I'm not going to tell anyone where I am. I could be Spider-Man, or I could be in my bolt hole.
It's very good. It's particularly good if sort of the Wyndham feel that the world might possibly catastrophically collapse, and you wouldn't know. You just quietly look after your vegetables. And
David does look like he's calling us from the room at the end of 2001, incidentally, everybody.
That's something to do with the wide-angle lens on this. I mean, it's actually a very small room, but the wide-angle lens does make it look very cool. Look like Leonard Rossiter might appear in 2001, might he, just kind of down the corridor in his suit.
Now, there's the thing. Leonard Rossiter, the star of 2001, I think, as far as we're all concerned.
He is so good in that. I love him asking those questions.
Oh, dear. Oh, David set the tone already. We've managed to get a Leonard Rossiter mention, and we haven't even started the podcast yet. Well done. Well done, everybody. Rising damp for Castle Drogo as well. So there we are. Perfect.
Shall we crack on? Let's crack on. Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast that gives new life to old books. Today, you find us standing on the outskirts of a sleepy English village in the mid-1950s. It is the morning of 27th of September, and we're looking across a field of stubble towards the spire of the village church, just visible through a stand of elm trees. Smoke from the village spirals upwards, but there are no birds in the sky. In the pasture to our left, a small herd of cows lie motionless, apparently sleeping. We open the gate to look more closely, when suddenly our sight begins to blur. Dun, dun, dun. I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher of Unbound, the platform where readers crowdfund books they really want to read.
And I'm Andy Miller, author of The Year of Reading Dangerously. And today we're joined by a guest making his backlisted debut, David Farr. Hello, David.
Hi there. Hi.
From a mystery location. David is a writer and director for Page, Stage and Screen. He began his career in the theatre. He was artistic director of London's Gate Theatre and the Lyric Theatre Hammersmith, where he directed productions of Kafka and Harold Pinter. He has also directed at the National Theatre and Young Vic and was associate director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He has more recently moved into screenwriting his first feature film, Hannah. David later adapted the film into a 3-season television series for Amazon Prime. One of the reasons we wanted David to come on here before we get to the actual book is he has a history of adapting a wide range of source texts.
Amazing.
Which include the UN Inspector, Gogol, Metamorphosis, Kafka, as mentioned, Crime and Punishment in Dalston.
Quite proud of that one.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And his adaptation of John le Carré's novel, The Night Manager, which I'm sure lots of people listening to this will have seen, starring Hugh Laurie and Tom Hiddleston, aired on BBC One in 2016. A total of 9.9 million people tuned in to watch the series finale, and the show earned multiple awards and nominations. He's also, listeners, a man who adapted Philip K. Dick's story, The Impossible Planet. You've really covered all the bases there, pretty much.
I've colonised adaptation from slightly maverick texts. I think that would be vaguely how I would describe it. Yeah.
Did you find with one of the things about Philip K. Dick as a prose stylist, if we can just digress immediately, is he's ever so good at ideas and very, very bad at dialogue. Is that something you were aware of going into that? Were you a fan of Philip K. Dick? And is that something you had to work on?
I wasn't a fan of Philip K. Dick. I almost for that reason. I don't think I love his writing, but he's a wonderful conceptualist and a brilliant mind and philosopher. And to be honest, I don't care at all if his dialogue's rubbish, because I'm not going to write his dialogue. I'm going to write my dialogue. What you want as an adapter is you want a story that just works, that someone has just had a wonderful idea. In fact, I'd say, to be honest, The Impossible Planet and Midwich Cuckoos have deep similarities in that regard, that you can probably tell the idea to a child in about 30 seconds and someone will they'll get excited. And once that initial idea is there, I tend to we'll talk about this in detail in a minute, but I tend to go off on my own a little bit, at least a bit, because I feel that's the job. I feel like otherwise you might as well just read the book. I love books. I want to do something that departs to some extent. And then, of course, because you love the book, it also stays truthful.
Well, fortunately, we can have both. Or in the case of this, several versions, which is, we'll get onto the Midwich Cuckoos in a minute. David's first book for children, The Book of Stolen Dreams, was published to acclaim last year and comes out in paperback this September. And backlisted listeners may care to know we have a motto on this show: the best books are books about books. And as luck would have it, The Book of Stolen Dreams is about books, isn't it?
It is so much about books. It's about a very strange and magical book, and these brother and sister suddenly end up with it because their father is rather brutally arrested and taken to a camp by this evil dictator who runs the country, and they have to figure out why it's so important. And it's about life and death and family. The book has a very secret ability to allow you to cross from one space to another, from the land of the living, essentially, to what in the book is called the hinterland, but it's kind of the land of the dead, if you like.
This is
great.
It's
great.
It comes out of my great love of in fact, not really even children's literature, but kind of all those wonderful turn of the century. I've got a German Jewish family on my mother's side, and that's very important in the book. And it comes out of love of Hesse, and particularly Stefan Zweig, and all these that kind of world where
Stefan Zweig for kids. What?
Exactly.
I'm sold.
Well, actually, Wes Anderson, the filmmaker, did sort of do that with Grand Budapest Hotel, and I took my kids, and they just loved it so much because it sort of was a simple world. It was kind of strangely nostalgic, and yet at the same time it didn't feel old-fashioned. It felt modern, and actually probably quite inspiring to me when I wrote the book, just thinking about the way in which he as a filmmaker manages to do that. Yeah, wonderful. I love Stefan Zweig.
The Book of Stolen Dreams is available from the backlisted.org bookshop.org bookshop. And your latest play, A Dead Body in Taos, performs at Wilton's Music Hall in London and on tour this autumn. But, of course, the reason we are specifically delighted that you're here is that you have adapted John Wyndham's The Midwich Cuckoos. It's just premiered on Sky, starring Keeley Hawes and our former guest, Sam West. And we've been watching it. What a treat this has been over the last week.
Really has.
Rinsing Wyndham on screen and in print. It's been absolutely brilliant, hasn't it, Johnny?
Yeah, we loved it. Absolutely loved it. And
I'm very pleased.
as you say, what you need is a great story. And The Midwich Cuckoos is a great story. It was by John Wyndham. It was first published by Michael Joseph in 1957, the fourth in a series of hugely successful science fiction novels, which began with Day of the Triffids in 1951 and made Wyndham a household name. They've never been out of print, these books. It's been adapted for film and television and radio numerous times, most famously probably in the Wolf Rilla 1960 classic film Village of the Damned. The book was disparaged later on in the 1960s by fellow sci-fi writer Brian Aldiss as an example of cosy middle-class catastrophes. But in recent years, there's been something of a critical revaluation, with Margaret Atwood calling it Wyndham's chef d'oeuvre, and adaptations like Dan Rebolato's for radio.
Hello,
BBC
Dan.
Radio. Yeah, thank you, Dan, in 2003. And, of course, David's current 7-part serial on Sky, where there are layers of moral ambiguity and dramatic complexity that maybe previous generations of readers had missed. Anyway, before we roll up our sleeves and start weighing up the ethical and biological implications of xenogenesis, Andy, what have you been reading this week?
Is that what we're doing today? Okay, great.
Oh, yes.
It'll be fine.
Yes. Impregnation by foreign species. It's all...
Well, I was down in Cornwall, as I was saying a moment ago. So on my way out of the house last week, I grabbed a book, knowing actually not very much about it, other than that it was set in Cornwall. And that book was The Feast by Margaret Kennedy.
Ah, Margaret Kennedy.
Which was published last summer by Faber and Faber, with a very Cath Kidston-y cover.
Very summary.
And the words Cornwall Summer 1947 on the front. So I think they know who they're going after with that. But anyway, they got me. And this is the third of Margaret Kennedy's novels that I've read. After Becky Brown and Nora Perkins talked about Troy Chimneys on episode 109. Yeah. And of course, Alexandra Pringle brought the Constant Nymph to us a few episodes later in episode 113. And one of the things about Margaret Kennedy is no two of her novels that I've read are anything like one another. So this one is from 1950. I think it's like her 12th novel, maybe. It's set in the Pendisac Manor Hotel in Cornwall at midsummer 1947. And according to Kathy Rensenbrink's excellent introduction, the idea of it stems from Margaret Kennedy's trying to create a set of characters, each of whom represented a different deadly sin. So you think you're reading, forgive me, John, a cosy middle-class catastrophe. Thank you, Brian Aldiss. But actually you're reading something quite strange. As it went on, I was thinking, this book's much weirder than I thought it was going to be. I reckon those Cath Kidston buyers might be slightly taken aback by what's happening in this book. So I would describe it as a cross between the following, and there's no irony here. It's a cross between Agatha Christie, The Fortnight in September by R.C. Sheriff, which is a great favourite of ours here, One Fine Day by Molly Panther Downs, terrific novel, and Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, which is something not a combination that you often see together, Molly Panther Downs and Ingmar Bergman. But there is, as it goes on, it becomes stranger and more symbolic and has a really haunting denouement, where I couldn't even swear to you, I'm sure, what happened. And indeed, Kathy says in her introduction that she says brilliantly, the feast is so full of pleasure that you could be forgiven for not seeing how clever it is. And actually, it did remind me reading Wyndham this week, there is a sort of post-war thing going on. There's a kind of, what is the post-war settlement? How do the various classes from strata of society, how are they going to reach an accommodation? What are the forces that are shaping the relationships between the classes? Those things are all in this book. Anyway, I just want to read you one little bit, which gives you a very good flavour of how this is a little bit more unexpected than I thought it might be. We're about to meet a lady novelist called Anna, who has persuaded a girl called Hebe to come with her to her friend Polly's house, a few miles' drive from the hotel. Anna pushed open a green door in a very tall white wall. The garden went uphill in a steep succession of grass terraces and a flight of stone steps up the middle. At the top stood the house. And on the bottom terrace, 2 people were lying on the grass, sunbathing. They lay on their faces, and they wore slacks. They had such curly hair that Hebe supposed they were girls, until, as she and Anna went past, they sat up, revealing masculine torsos. "Oh, Anna," said one of them, "have you got any cigarettes? We've run out." "Only enough for myself," said Anna. "Is Polly up at the house?" "I expect so." "Where's Bruce?" Anna laughed and took Hebe up the steps to the house. At the top they had a fine view of the harbour and the roofs of lower houses, and then they walked through a long window into a room full of people who looked all alike to Hebe until she had begun to sort them out. They were not young, and they were not old. Most of them wore slacks, so that it was different to tell in several cases whether they were men or women. They did not seem to be particularly pleased to see Anna, but they stared at Hebe. Presently Polly, who had red hair and was unmistakably female, asked who she was. "This," said Anna, pulling her forward, "is Hebe. She's staying at my hotel, and I've brought her along because she's in the doghouse over a slight case of murder." This was received with some animation, and an old gentleman, who was certainly not an old lady, came forward and shook Hebe by the hand. Hebe made the little curtsy she had learnt in America, but could not get her hand away until Anna intervened and told him that Hebe was only there to be looked at. "Oh, my God," said Polly crossly. "I draw the line at infant murderesses." "Who did she murder?" asked several voices, and somebody gave Hebe a drink. "She'll be no trouble," declared Anna. "She can play with Nicolette." "Nicolette's not here, darling. Her father has got her. Listen, Anna, I've had a letter from the landlord." The drink was like nothing Hebe had ever tasted. Her head spun after a couple of sips. Their voices became booming and indistinct so that she could not be quite sure of what she heard, but it seemed to her that Polly had used one of the words. There were 3 or 4 of the words, and she had seen them written up on walls, but had never been able to find out what they meant, only that nobody ever used them, and that the people who wrote them up were not agreed as to the spelling. Presently Polly used it again, quite unmistakably, and then she used another. By the time that she had finished describing her landlord's letter, she had used them all, and several which Hebe had never seen written up. But nobody seemed to be surprised, and presently someone asked again about the murder.
I love it.
Isn't that and that, let me tell you, everybody, comes out of relatively nowhere.
Yeah.
You've been bowling along on this quite strange murder mystery stroke social contract, and then suddenly there's this efflorescence of debauchery in Cornwall. So yes, that's The Feast by Margaret Kennedy. That's published by Faber and Faber, £9.99. John, what have you been reading this week?
Well, I recently was in your neck of the woods, Andy, at the Wealden Festival.
Yes,
which is very lovely up on the in a very nice country house. Lots of nature writing going on there, and lots of other good stuff. But my eye was drawn to a series of titles by a publisher I'd previously not heard of called Hazel Press. I was drawn to them because they were really, really beautiful, small volumes of mostly poetry, but some essays. I was also drawn to them because one of the books was by Julia Blackburn, who's one of my favourite writers. I was also drawn because this, if you will probably recognise, Andy, this is by the great book designer from the 1990s, Jeff Wilson, who did all
of course,
Captain Corelli, all of Louis de Bernier, and many other books as well. So Hazel Press started in lockdown, one woman, a van that she drives around literary festivals. The books are beautifully produced, beautifully designed. They don't have any blurbs. They're all £10 each. There are amazing names, as well as Julia Blackburn, Martin Shaw, the storyteller who I love, Helen Mort, the poet, Katrina Nomi, Ella Duffy, Carol Ann's daughter, Edmund Duval, Hair with Amber Eyes. She's gathered together an extraordinary list very, very quickly of beautiful, I think, wonderful books. The one I was going to just read very briefly from was the Julia Blackburn book. It is 40 fragments, I think, probably taken from her notebooks. Julia Blackburn, should just say, I think still one of the most underrated and brilliant English writers. Started in the 90s with Daisy Bates in the Desert. She's done non-fiction. She wrote an amazing book about John Krask, the painter who used needlework to construct his artworks in East Anglia. She wrote the book about Doggerland, Time Songs. She did an amazing memoir called The Three of Us about her bohemian upbringing. This is kind of fragments shawled against whatever old age. Here we go. I'll read 3 of them for you, 4 of them. I'm 73. My father died at 61 on the night of my 29th birthday. My mother died at 82, holding on for just a bit longer, she said, to get past April Fool's Day. My husband died in the first moments of turning 76, and even that death is almost 8 years ago now. Gentle departures that between them carry much of the story of my life. 2. The days are filled with the thoughts of the end of days, apocalyptic horses on the gallop, eyes wide, sparks from their hooves set the forests alight, steam from their nostrils melts the ice fields, sweat runs down their flanks to join the salty oceans. I lean close and hear the hum of them like a heartbeat, quick and slow, then quick again. 3. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, someone said, that we would get it clear? I doubt it, said the rest of us, our faces filled with fear. 4. But then there's the child who hides under the bed, and I pretend I cannot see her protruding feet until she emerges triumphant and laughing, and all is well. But then the robin walks into the room, proprietorial and tiny and unafraid, and all is well. But then I'm kissed by the man who's become my lover in this late chapter of the life, and the kiss pulls a thread through me from my mouth to the soles of my feet, and all is well. But then the moon is glimmering peach pink and unconcerned behind a semaphore of trees, and all is well. And the last one, this is 17. 3:30 a.m., and the sharp cry of a tawny owl reverberating through the dark garden. The owl speaks of the night and of solitude and of the vast time of its being in the world, way before we came along. Anyway, you've got 40 of those lovely, beautiful
wonderful
bits of. It's really nice. I love discovering new independent publishers, and I completely love a woman in her 70s who's just decided she's going to do it, and she's driving and she's selling them into independent bookshops.
So
and they're beautiful.
Tell us quickly, where can we get it?
Hazel Press, you can buy them online at hazelpress.com. You can get them from the London Review of Books bookshop. You can get them from most good independents. She's not at the moment being distributed through the bigger chains.
That's the Wren by Julia Blackburn.
The Wren by Julia Blackburn, £10, and it's environmentalism, feminism, and great poetry. We'll be back in just a sec.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Home means something different to everyone. But with Rocket Mortgage, home can mean even more. It can mean a college education, taming your high-interest debt, even a renovation. We've made it easier than ever to use your home equity. That home you worked so hard for, now it can work hard for you. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC. Licensed in all 50 states. NMLSConsumerAccess.org, number 3030.
Consider for a moment the end of the world. Throughout the centuries, many suggestions have been made as to how it will come about and when, but few more sinister than this.
These things, whatever they may be, have not only succeeded in throwing us out of their element with ease, but already they have advanced to do battle with us in ours. For the moment, we have pushed them back, but they will return. For the same urge drives them as drives us, the necessity to exterminate or be exterminated. And when they come again, if we let them, they will come better equipped.
Or maybe this might be the beginning of the end.
Oh, great.
Who would want to miss out on the opportunity of Alan Wicker reading from the Kraken Wakes? No one. No one. We're going to hear a bit more from that later on. That's a 1960, very rare interview, a feature of John Wyndham on Tonight, I believe, on BBC. Yeah, on BBC One in 1960. David, before we discuss any plot elements of The Midwich Cuckoos, Village of the Damned, anyone's version, including your version, when did you first read a book by John Wyndham?
Yeah, it's very important, this, because I was 12, and the Day of the Triffids was on television, and
you one with John Deteen,
absolutely,
yeah.
And it was
starring.
As I recall, I've dared not see it since, in case I'm wrong. It was great.
It's brilliant.
Oh, good.
It's still really disturbing.
Maybe I'll watch it again. Yeah. It's one of those ones. You don't want to watch them. Sometimes you watch them again, and you go, "Oh no, what a terrible taste I had when I was 12." But on the whole, actually, that was a good time for television. You know, whether it be Le Carré or with Alec Guinness, or other Dennis Potter and Edge of Darkness. But this one, I really loved it. So then I went off and found other books, basically, by him. Not all of them. But I read Chrysalids, which I liked. But the one that just completely scared me so deeply was The Midwich Cuckoos. And I think it's because it's in that sort of little hermetically sealed town. And without going into the story yet, as you say, I was living in a hermetically sealed little town.
It was relatable.
And in fact, weirdly, when I then read Chocky, I discovered that Wonersh, which is literally 3 miles from my house, is in Chocky. And of course, then I discovered that John Wyndham lived in Petersfield. So of course, he's all over. Basically, it was weird. I was in Godalming. And Wonersh is around the corner, and Petersfield is where he lived. So it was really, I was sort of like, okay, I am in John Wyndham's world, and in fact, the aliens are here. And then I started thinking in my slightly 12-year-old way, maybe I'm an alien, or maybe the kid across the road is an alien. Because he does that to you, Wyndham, doesn't he? He starts making you think, well, what if I'm an alien, but I just don't know? I haven't been activated yet by the consciousness. So altogether, this book, I couldn't sleep for ages, and it really it was even, and its quietness. You know, you talked about that cozy catastrophe thing that you mentioned, Brian. All this is criticism, and of course he's totally right. But for me, that's the quality. That's the unique.
That's what surely that's the appeal.
Yeah, that's the skill. Yeah,
how normality spirals out of control so quickly,
and it actually makes me very very defensive of Wyndham in that regard, because I feel like when America does cozy catastrophe, it's cool, like it's Steven Spielberg and it's Stephen King, and it's those picket fences, and it's people rollerboarding or skateboarding, whatever the word is, along the street in the sunshine, and it's basically Stranger Things. Stranger Things is cozy catastrophe. It's really cozy. So actually, he starts all that. He starts the idea that you can just live in this normal town. It's very nice. Everyone's middle class. No one's got any social problem, political, And of course, you can criticize that and say it's a particular world. But in that lies terror. And for me, therefore, it's a hugely influential, massively influential book.
Brian Aldiss is being very grumpy there as well, isn't he? In 1973, I mean, come on,
tad disingenuous as well.
It's a whole strand of British sci-fi that runs through Wyndham,
mass, yeah.
Nigel Neal, exactly. Certainly into late 60s, early 70s Doctor Who, that one of the things they realised was particularly terrifying to children was if you made things happen in streets they recognised, in shops and their own homes, rather than in, some fantastic alien environment.
Exactly. And now it's called things like speculative fiction, or, there's all sorts of new words for this to try and not call it science fiction because people find that scary in some way. So he invented this in a way, you could argue. I mean, I suppose H.G. Wells has got a certain element of that to some extent. But I think it's a bit more close to home with Wyndham. If his stories are not quite so outlandish, that they tend to exist through human beings, don't they? Often literally, like Chucky or this one.
I reread a few for this, and I must say I thought Chucky was absolutely brilliant. I thought that stands up incredibly well. I mean, there's lots to enjoy in the others. We'll talk about some of them later in the show, but Chucky, I thought, wow, and Chucky's almost his last. Is it his last
it's sort
book
of 68,
when he's alive?
I think it is its last published one.
It's his last one.
He was maybe writing stories, but it's got to be the greatest imaginary friend book ever written.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got a question for you, Nikki. You said that do you remember the early 80s Day of the Triffids?
Yeah, I remember watching Day of the Triffids and then reading Day of the Triffids and not being able to have a plant in my house for about 25 years. Genuinely, I couldn't sleep in a room with plants.
All his books are about a kind of uneasy relationship with the natural world, aren't they? It's a kind of almost like sort of Darwinian nightmares. He's so interested in other forms of consciousness, which we'll come on to with this book as well. But whether it's animals or insects in particular, it's a brilliant story of his called "Consider Her Ways," about a woman who wakes up and finds that she's inhabiting this body of a large gravid female, and she's horrified by what's happened. It's a world where men have gone extinct, and it's kind of strange early feminist story. There's so much going in. I think a lot of teenagers, late 60s, early 70s, everybody read Wyndham.
Yeah, I agree. He was still very present when we were kids, yeah.
And I remember Triffids, and I remember Kraken Wakes, and I remember Chrysalids, and I remember... But I hadn't actually ever read, until we were doing this podcast, I'd never read the book of the Midwich Cuckoos. And it's, my God, it's it's several million degrees better than I was expecting it to be as a novel.
What's it about, John?
Nikki, John doesn't need to tell us.
No.
Because we've got audio to help us. So what we've got here, we're going to hear an excerpt from the trailer of Village of the Damned, the famous film adaptation of the Midwich Cuckoos, and then we're going to pick up the story in an excerpt from the trailer of David's adaptation of the Midwich Cuckoos.
Science fiction has never imagined so strange or terrifying a story as that of the village of Midwich, England, cut off from life as we know it by some mysterious force. And later, at one and the same time, a child was born to every woman in the village. Children that grew to look like this. Beautiful youngsters behind whose fiery, hypnotic eyes lurked the demon forces of another world.
They're not human. They ought to be destroyed.
Forces put to such sinister use that it became a national emergency.
We are gathered here as advisors, as scientists, as government experts.
Have we established anything about the origins of these children?
There is the possibility of the transmission of energy.
Let me get this straight. You imply that these children may be the result of impulses directed towards us from somewhere in the universe.
Well, I assume, listeners, you're gripped by the acting talents of George Sanders and Richard Vernon.
You know that half the budget for the movie went on Sanders' salary, Sanders' fee.
Quite right.
£20,500.
Worth every penny.
Every shilling.
Trailers in those days were not understated, were they? They didn't do that.
They were not.
Now let's fast forward 62 years, and let the new adaptation of the Midwich Cuckoos pick up the story.
Oh, Hannah. Don't.
Hannah, please. Mummy. What have you done? I can't sleep.
And why can't you sleep?
Because bad things will happen.
Since 9:47, we've had a complete blackout. No communication in or out. We've got no idea what it is.
I don't trust them.
Sweet dreams, everyone. David, it's terrific, absolutely terrific. So my first question is, I'm going to ask you two questions quite quickly. How long have you wanted to adapt it? This, specifically the Midwich Cuckoos. How long have you wanted to adapt it? And my second question, you've made a significant number of changes, one of which is Midwich is a village in the book, and you've chosen to move the location somewhere else. So I'd like to ask you about both those things. First of all, so how long have you wanted to do this?
I wanted to do it in a sort of theoretical sense since I read it, in the sense that it's one of those strange stories that I saw very clearly. And obviously I've got one of those brains when I read things. I see them sometimes if the story grabs me. Then more specifically what happened was I have a friend called Rob Cheek, who is a producer, and I knew that he had a connection to the Wyndham estate and that a colleague and him were working on various of the Wyndhams. Because Wyndham had slightly fallen out of popularity a little bit. And they felt, I think rightly, that the stories still had so much to say, even though he'd been emulated by Hollywood in other versions. And I said to him, look, if you ever get this one, Midwich Cuckoos, it's mine. And it was about 8 years ago. I said it in a very proprietorial way. I think it was before Night Manager. Then Night Manager happened, and me saying that was luckily a bit more useful, because actually it meant that, rather than some enthusiastic Surrey boy, it was actually someone who had a bit of history in making stuff. So lo and behold, it wasn't that long ago, 3 or 4 years ago, he comes back to me and he says, we've got it. And it was difficult to get it, just quickly, because Hollywood, the not so good John Carpenter movie, and I love John Carpenter.
That's mid-90s.
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's badly cast in Christopher Reeve and Kirstie.
And they stuck with the stupid title.
Yeah, they did Village of the Damned again, but of course the first film was much better. And anyway, the rights got completely entangled in the studio system, as happens, and it took a long time, heroic work by a man called Mark Samuelson to bring them out, and Rob is his colleague, and so that suddenly there it was and available. But to answer your second question seamlessly, the thing about it when you update something like this is, I'm really aware that people have copied this sort of story. So when you think about this story, you've got to think, well, why now? Why is it interesting now? And the idea of a remote village that nobody has contact with, and he's very careful about that in the book. He talks about the fact that it's not really anywhere. It has no particular use. It's a strange anomaly. He talks about Midwich in this quite funny way.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons he's doing that, technically, is it's easy to not notice it's there. And so when this thing happens, this terrible, drama with all these women becoming pregnant, it's not impossible to imagine that you could keep it secret. And you could keep the blackout secret. And I realised very quickly that the blackout, something like that, happens in modern day Britain, regardless of where you are. It's impossible to imagine that nobody would notice, that it wouldn't be online in seconds, and so on and so forth. And it felt to me that rather than trying to fight that, I should almost allow that to be a good thing. And then from there, I thought, well, actually, most people these days, the rural life feels somewhat nostalgic in a way that perhaps maybe it didn't in 1950. My dad was brought up in a rural village in Worcestershire. I wasn't. I was brought up in a small town. I think of most people, that's normality. So it felt to me like, well, if we're going to accept the fact that we're not in this remote, hidden, little tiny space where these strange things can happen unnoticed, if we're going to do something a little bit different, why not embrace that? Why not go to a commuter town that's an hour outside London, that is classic, modern Britain? If people talk about the classic modern voter, it's always someone in a small town who drives a Mondeo man, didn't it? So that felt to me like, and it is, of course, personal. I was brought up in a town like that, and I wanted to emulate it to some extent.
By moving it from the country into the commuter belt, you heighten, don't you, the sense of something gone very wrong. The fact that as happens early in the book, the total blackout zone in and around Midwich, as you say, you'd expect it almost now, wouldn't you, in a village, if you in a TV series.
It reminds me, I mean, we're not talking about but the movies of M. Night Shyamalan are what I didn't want to do. They're always in a very deliberately isolated space. They're not real. And in a film, it's okay. It can last a certain hour and a half. In a television show, it's like a novel. You have chapters, and you need to get involved in characters you really care about and that have some recognition factor with yourself. I think, his films, for example, I'm sure there are sci-fi writers you could think of who do this. It's not, the characters are not what you really care about, it's the concept. But I knew that the character was absolutely essential. And so it did, it felt right that we should embrace the modernity of it and not try and cheat in any way.
It's that thing, isn't it, of once you've got, as you say, you've got such a great plot in this book, and a lot of certainly in the first 2 or 3 episodes, some of the pleasure of it is seeing how you adapt that to the age of the internet. But you also make a big change with Gordon Zellaby, the George Sanders character in the film, but also a big character in the book. Is you flip that into Susanna Zellaby, who's a woman psychiatrist with a complex history of her own. But that's an interesting. I'm just curious as to what led to that.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that it's a chance to have Keeley Hawes, which is a great reason for.
Yes, but it came before that. It was actually the first thing I changed after having decided to shift it into a sort of more conventional town and it wasn't because I love actually the Zellaby relationship. I love their marriage in the book. It's actually strangely moving, and I love the fact that Angela delivers the speech at the meeting. But it just felt like if there's a flaw to the book, and I don't flaw is the wrong word. If there's a particularity to the book, it's that Zellaby does pontificate aloud a lot. And he's right, and he's right almost endlessly. What's moving about it is that he's unsure what to do about his rightness, and so that's very touching. But I knew that on television, obviously, that's not going to work, and it does feel a little of its time. So I sort of went, okay, let's go. I suddenly had an instinct around wanting the opposite of that, a female listener rather than a male speaker. And so she's a listener, she's a therapist, and she listens to children. Her job is to listen to children in the way that most adults can't. And actually the little bit in the trailer where the child says, bad things will happen, we see that very early on. She is good at her job. She's good at listening. The irony is she can't hear her own daughter, and she can't relate to that. So, and actually that's much more common in therapists than one might think, is that in the personal relationship, they really struggle to do the very thing they're brilliant at doing in their professional life. For me, I hope she still has the sort of priestess quality that I think Zellaby does have, a priest quality to some, a seer, that he has.
Zellaby in the book, it's certainly clear by the end that he has, from a mixture of curiosity and let's say compassion, has forged a relationship with those children. But the relationship that you might forge in the 50s in a kind of paternalistic, somewhat didactic way, you've got to find a substitute for now, haven't you?
Yeah.
And therefore, as you say, it's simply by dint of listening rather than listening to, rather than talking at.
For example, he could have been a teacher, a male teacher in a school, a really clever teacher in a school. But what that will never have now, that the one has in the past, is this strongly intellectual quality that Zellaby has. Zellaby is writing a book, as I recall, called While We Last, when this happens.
and he's failing to deliver it to his publisher.
I'm looking forward to doing it on the podcast at some point.
I mean, he is basically Wyndham, isn't he? He is Wyndham.
Yeah.
And so if he's not going to be...
Andy, sure.
Yeah, you should do it. If he's not going to be Wyndham, then I think you have to make a bigger shift than just, he's going to be a male teacher, because he won't have that almost mystical quality. And then you also start to get into the slightly strange thing, well, should a teacher have that relationship with children? No, probably not. Whereas a female therapist whose job is literally, I mean, to sort of see into, and there's that. It reminds me slightly of that wonderful Ursula Le Guin story about the guy who's talking to his therapist about what he sees into the future, and then what he sees happens. Do you remember? I can't remember what it's called. It's called something like, it's not The Laser Time, it's the other one. And I found that book wonderful, and it's the way in which she sort of turns the therapeutic process, which is so kind of modern and rational in some sense, it's supposed to be anyway, scientific. She turns that into a mystical thing, and so this weird connection between psychotherapeutic processes and what we loosely call in the old days, mysticism or telekinesis. That those two things, perhaps they're not as different as we think. Yeah. That interested me.
Can I ask? John mentioned how much, and you mentioned how much talking there is in the Midwich Cuckoos. Certainly in the second half of the book, that people stand around offering. I mean, I found it totally entertaining and gripping, I have to add. But they do kind of stand around offering you points of view on certain philosophical issues. When you're adapting, do you have to think, well, we can't have that much dialogue? What will I substitute for it? Will I have to extract plot from what's there, or do I have to impose new plot?
I'm unusual in a way as a screenwriter because I actively dislike too much dialogue. And actually, weirdly, with this book, that's quite strange because I do feel that if another writer now had done this book, there would have been more people talking about the philosophical ideas than there are in my version. I'm a bit averse on screen, not in books, on screen to too much articulation. Now that may be a flaw in my, maybe I could have explored more. I feel the piece is absolutely actively exploring the philosophical ideas around everything, and I really love very much the scene at the very end, towards the very end, where Susanna Zellaby finally talks properly to one of the children, which is my version of when Bernard in the book talks to the children, and it's really shocking. And you suddenly realise how much more naive Zellaby is than the child. It's the child who's got the wisdom and totally understands.
It's so true.
It's so good.
But also the children in every version, the book, Village of the Damned, your adaptation, we can't wait to hear from the children, right? Yeah. That's one of the things that's being held back by the storyteller. That we want those guys to have that conversation, but we wait and wait to have it.
Don't you think, Andy, the genius of the children, both in the book and in the various adaptations, is they're every bright kid that's ever felt that that they've ever felt out of place. I mean, I rewatched the film again last night. In the movie, they really try and amp up the sinister horror thing because they're trying to sell the movie in the States, which is why it's called Village of the Damned, because they were worried that Americans didn't know what cuckoos were.
Or Midwich.
Yeah. Witches is not good.
Also, I think the timing is not accidental. So this is late 50s and the Village of the Damned, the film is early 60s. And what you're seeing is a kind of precog beat boom. You're seeing you're about to enter the age of groups where gangs of rebels become the thing, right? It's slightly ahead of that sociological explosion with us.
To me, the most obvious lineage is when those kids grow up, they're going to be in the Clockwork Orange.
Ah, yes.
Because Malcolm McDowell, 10 years before, was probably in the Village of the Damned, wasn't he?
Definitely.
Yes, of course.
Because that actor Martin Stevens, more or less, who plays David, the kid in the book, is more or less he traded on that for he's still trading on this thing. He's still alive because of the that extraordinary kind of the wigs and the eyes, obviously, but also just that sense of menace that the kids definitely have.
Yeah. But I so agree with you about the fact that every kid who's bright or a bit odd felt odd, thought they might be one. That's literally what I felt.
Yeah.
And I'm called David.
Yeah. You are. And you have golden eyes, which no one can see. That is weird, man.
And strange,
anyway, I don't know why you were drawn to it, David. I have no idea. Why don't we've got some more of that really rare interview of John Wyndham. But do you know what? I think I ought to read the dust jacket first before we listen to that. So I've got here the dust jacket of the Midwich Cuckoos. We should say that John Wyndham had already published The Day of the Triffids, The Crake and Wakes and The Chrysalids. So he's a known author. Those had been bestsellers. Here's the jacket copy for the first edition of the Midwich Cuckoos in 1957. The important question, what should I do in case of interplanetary invasion, raises no less important subsidiary questions such as, how can I be sure of recognising an interplanetary invasion if I encounter one? And is this an interplanetary invasion at all? Or is it something else? Although this story does not go as far as to solve such quandaries, classic, let me ask the question and not answer it. It does relate to an occasion when these questions, as well as a number of others, arose to confront the inhabitants of the secluded, somnolent and considerably astonished village of Midwich. Mr. Gordon Zellaby of Kyle Manor, Midwich, had few doubts on the nature of the events there, but even fewer practical remedies to suggest. He complained, quote, I cannot recall a single account of any interplanetary invasion that is of the least help in our present dilemma. Take H.G.'s Martians, for instance. As the original exponents of the death ray, they were formidable, but their behaviour was utterly conventional. They simply conducted a straightforward campaign with a weapon that outclassed anything we could bring against them. But at least we could try to fight them, whereas, in this case, the Midwich Cuckoos were no less formidable, but in a different way, a way that precluded straightforward reprisals.
That's good.
Of all our English SF writers, to quote a recent review in The Observer, John Wyndham, quote, seems the only one to whom the medium is the natural mode of expression. We are confident that the Midwich Cuckoos will delight his many readers.
That is such a strange blurb.
Do you think?
A little.
I think it's playing the John Wyndham card. Yeah. It's saying, you like this guy, he's on form.
It's a little bit like an instruction. It says as if the book might be an instruction manual on how to deal with interplanetary, which is quite strange.
John, what do you think? You're a publisher of much expertise and standing.
I suppose it's tricky, isn't it? Because having just read it, I think they do nail the fact that there is a moral ambiguity in your relationship to what they're basically saying. The bad guys in H.G. Wells are pretty obviously bad. They've got death rays and they're destroying us. Whereas this is much more the fact that we've all just confessed to having deep sympathies with the children, and I don't think any of I think the things that you bring out, David, in your adaptation of the Zellaby kind of confusion as to what to do, and whether or not, in either case, without giving the ending away to people who haven't read the book or seen the TV show, in either case, it doesn't lessen the moral ambiguity. And there's also a brilliant thing that you pick up, which I obviously didn't. It's not in the film. Is when the ice cream. The fact is how although it's a hive, essentially it's a hive mind. These in the book, the 61 kids all operate in a way that they can read one another's minds, and if one learns something, the others all learn it simultaneously. So that's an interesting, and that's definitely Wyndham Harris, or whatever the name you want to use for him. That's his interest in science and in Darwinianism, and particularly insect communities and different species, and who's gonna win. This is that sort of post-war paranoia that all his books are full of. But the bit where in the book it's a bullseye, I think, that one of the kids is enjoying, and Zellaby's noticing that they're enjoying the individual quality of either eating ice cream in the TV show or eating the bullseye in the book. So they're not just. That's the thing, is they're not just a hive mind. They're not just the Martians coming to destroy the planet. That's, in fact, the brilliant thing I think about the book is you don't really have any sense of it being an alien life form. It might just be a more evolved form of human. There aren't any spaceships. There aren't any even spores like there are in the Triffids. It's really subtle.
I think you've absolutely put your finger on the key center of the piece, though, for our book and any adaptation should be that notion around the collective hive, which is meant to be one, and in that lies its strength. So whereas we will squabble and have different opinions about how to deal with the life, this external force, they won't. And that's terrifying, and it smacks of, perhaps it smacked of totalitarianism a little bit in the 50s. Probably for us, I think it smacks of this new wave of populism or something. But it definitely scares me still now, living in today. But then that wonderful thing that, of course, they are different in taste. And if they're different in taste, couldn't that taste develop from just ice cream or a sweet into a human being? And suddenly the notion of, oh, hold on a second, they're living with a family. And if the one thing the book perhaps doesn't explore as much as I thought it might when I read it again, is the effect of living in family situations on those cuckoos. It's almost like, and I think Wyndham does this quite a lot, he sets everything up astonishingly. And then it's not that he loses interest, but he loses interest in certain bits of it.
Yes, but he writes about what he wants to write about. That's what I think is so fascinating about all his books. He sets up, you're so right, David, he sets up, we're probably still reading him because of the setups of his plots, not necessarily what he does.
Where he gets to,
The honest answer on that one is that the ending of his book is a nightmare for adapting, because there's this brilliant bit. The kid is talking to Bernard. The kid is saying, we are the life force. We are going to destroy it.
Yeah.
But he says, maybe we could delay it for a bit. And then actually all they want to do is take a helicopter to somewhere like the Scilly Isles or the Isle of Man, and it's really rubbish. And you're like, really? Why do you want to go there for a bit?
That's right.
You're absolutely right. In terms of the plotting, there is no, without giving away the ending, there is no convincing alternative. It's like nobody seems to know what to do with these kids. And obviously that's something that you did work on for the adaptation.
I would like to add that one of the things I found really interesting revisiting Wyndham's books this week is the Midwich Cuckoos is the book that he wrote after the Chrysalids.
Yeah.
And in a sense, the Midwich Cuckoos is a response to the Chrysalids. Yeah. So in the Chrysalids, you see a group of young kids or young people connected with a hive mind, but individuals who we root for. And in the Midwich Cuckoos, it's almost like he said, okay, I'm going to revisit that idea, but I am going to posit the idea of that group of young people as a collective, but individuals, from not that we don't root for, but who have forces opposed against them in a way that is different from the Chrysalids. Yeah. I found that really, really fascinating. Very rich, actually, to read those two books together.
Yeah, and there's no question that in Midwich, they are the antagonist. I mean, you might be fascinated by them, but they are absolutely, definitely the antagonist.
They're not the good guys.
No.
This is from this rare interview with John Wyndham. Here he is talking about what's appropriate to put before readers.
Well, Mr. Wyndham, your books all deal with evil and fantastic happenings, very often, usually, in fact, set in fairly ordinary situations. Now, do you consciously set limits on these fantastic happenings? Do you limit your fantasy, or is it a case of anything goes?
Well, I wouldn't say they're all evil, but of course there do have to be limits. What one starts with is the theme, and then you work it out to the logical conclusion as far as possible. But there is an upward and a lower limit, and sometimes it works out so that the lower limit, well, is unacceptable. It's unpleasant.
Can you illustrate it?
Well, as far as the upper limit is concerned, you carry your invention to a point where it is acceptable to your reader. For instance, your English reader does not care for the idea of spaceships. I don't quite know why he does. Your American reader loves spaceships. But in England, you don't. Now, in the downward limit, some of the logical outcomes are not acceptable. For instance, in the Chrysalids, you see, you have a world that has been devastated by atomic bombs, and there are a lot of mutations resulting. Now, most mutations would naturally be pretty unpleasant, but one doesn't want to follow that along. I mean, it would swamp the whole story. So that one minimizes, one leaves out the most unpleasant ones, or even tasteless ones. For instance, there was, in the original, a point where a man had... his hat was knocked off, and he was seen to have a third eye on the top of his head. Well, there's no reason why I shouldn't have a third eye, but it just has an unpleasant taste.
So this was the limit of your lower depth?
On the whole, the story seemed pleasanter without.
David, you weren't tempted to put in a scene where someone knocks off a hat to reveal a third eye, were you?
No, but we did have good chats about. I've never heard that. I love the sort of consciousness around extremity. I think that's. We did have long chats about explicitness versus implicitness.
Go on. Well, no, tell us a bit more about that. Because presumably the audience of 2022 wants more jumps and scares and a bit more gore than Wyndham would have been happy to deliver. But you want to hold something back, right? You want to you suggest things rather than show them.
And actually, strangely, my greatest fear about my show, to be honest, was I decided to take my time at the beginning and not to rush straight into the blackout like the films do. And I was very scared about that. But I felt like I needed time to introduce the world and the characters. And if there's a problem, even with the Wolf Thriller film, it's that in the second half, you don't have time to get to know the characters enough. And in a television program, that's a problem. It doesn't matter in the film. It's so impeccably directed. It's so beautiful. It doesn't matter at all. But for a television show, it does. So I felt like I needed to take my time and go quietly was the kind of the phrase, the motto, go quietly. And interestingly, I think that has been more successful than actually some of the more, dramatic It's like people enjoy this uneasy dread, that this feeling that they know something's wrong and no one's telling them what it is. No one is saying what it is. And I wonder if in our very explicit, explosive, everything's out there, everything's being stated and articulated age, I wonder if there's a really interesting space now for quiet dread, quiet, intimate, strange feelings that are unspoken, because it's been more successful than I thought it would be in that regard.
So, David, have you got a bit you could read us that you feel captures something of what Wyndham does in the book?
Yeah, so I've strangely gone for a Zellaby section, even though I then changed him so radically. He is a strange one around. We're going to go on to gender. Some people accuse him of being
Wyndham.
Some people accuse him of being misogynist. Other people think he's strangely feminist, as we were talking about, with the short story. And it's a strange one. And I think here he just I like this bit because this is about a married couple getting to grips with a very serious problem, and it reminds me of talking to the mother of my children, or it reminds me of other parents talking about their own children and the way in which you think about things, but they're talking about something so much more extreme at the same time. And I quite like it. So here we go. Zellaby reached out and took her hand. After some minutes, he observed, "I wonder if a sillier and more ignorant catachresis than Mother Nature was ever perpetrated. It is because nature is ruthless, hideous, and cruel beyond belief that it was necessary to invent civilization. One thinks of wild animals as savage, but the fiercest of them begin to look almost domesticated when one considers the viciousness required of a survivor in the sea. As for the insects, their lives are sustained only by intricate processes of fantastic horror. There is no conception more fallacious than the sense of coziness implied by Mother Nature. Each species must strive to survive, and that it will do by every means in its power, however foul, unless the instinct to survive is weakened by conflict with another instinct." Angela seized the pause to put in, with a touch of impatience, "I've no doubt you're gradually working round to something, Gordon." "Yes," Zellaby owned. "I am working round again to cuckoos. Cuckoos are very determined survivors. So determined that there is really only one thing to be done with them, once one's nest is infested. I am, as you know, a humane man. I think I may even say a kindly man, by disposition. You may, Gordon. As a further disadvantage, I am a civilized man. For these reasons, I shall not be able to bring myself to approve of what ought to be done, nor even when we perceive its advisability will the rest of us. So, like the poor hen thrush, we shall feed and nurture the monster and betray our own species. Odd, don't you think?" he continued. "We could drown a litter of kittens that is no sort of threat to us, but these creatures we shall carefully rear." Angela sat motionless for some moments. Then she turned her head and looked at him long and steadily. "You mean that about what ought to be done. Don't you, Gordon? I do, my dear.
That's like, John, that's like listening to Herzog talking about nature.
It so is. I was just thinking that. The jungle. Fornication.
Timothy Treadwell looked into the eyes of the bear and saw love. I saw only hunger. I've never forgotten that.
That's what it is.
Nothing more terrifying than the eyes of a chicken.
Yeah.
You must never listen to this. That's wonderful, though. I think, David, what a tribute to your skills as an adapter of the text that you left that out completely because it's so great.
But it sums up the problem, doesn't it? I mean, any woman now listening to that goes, all she says is yes, dear, no, dear, and then of course, being a wonderful, highly intelligent woman, she works out what he means at the end and sort of gets the punchline. But that's not good enough for our day and age. It just doesn't work. He is still lecturing. He is still ahead of the game.
I mean, good though the Zellaby kind of monologues are, that it is there's a lot of men pontificating in this book, kind of Bernard and Zellaby.
One of the other books that I read was Trouble with Lycan, which is his last. So that's the last of his kind of imperial run.
Yeah.
In 1960. That's a very peculiar book. I think our friend Una McCormack has recommended it to me. It's sort of a glorious failure, Trouble with Lycan, because it's, Wyndham prided himself, he's called it logical fiction or logical speculative fiction. And Trouble with Lycan is about if you developed a life-prolonging treatment, what would it mean for feminism? But because he's not one of life's natural feminists, it's a brave effort by Wyndham, but it doesn't quite, come off. But I was trying to think, what other male writer would be trying to do that in 1960? I can't think of one.
No, I think he is strange in that way, and I think it comes down to this strange fact that he had this incredible, but bizarre, frustrated love affair all his life with this one woman who he couldn't marry for a long time because if she married,
Grace,
she wasn't allowed to be a teacher. She would be fired. That literally was the law. I mean, that is so outrageous. And he obviously, so he knew that, and I think there is something in him that he's not obviously brought up with the emotional language of feminism, but he instinctively feels it. And interestingly, even in Midwich, he gives the key speech of the Cuckoos, who are talking to Bernard later in the book, to a girl. Now, of course, it's a hive, so it could be any of them, but it is a girl who gives most of it. There is a boy and a girl, but a girl picks up the conversation and she says the killer lines towards the end. So I think there's something in him that is always pushing at that door.
I want to come back to this topic. We're just going to hear one last clip. Now, in 1960, if you worked for the BBC, you couldn't just say, as so many of us do to a writer, where'd you get your ideas from? You had to present it in a different way. So here's another clip of John Wyndham answering the question as it was expressed back then.
May I ask you, Mr. Wyndham, where it is that you rely upon, how it is you rely upon, and indeed what it is you rely upon for your stimulus? I mean, after all, you're dealing with subjects of fantasy which are outside our own experience. Do you simply brood and think of more and more evil?
Well, I wouldn't say they're all evil. You know, the Midwich Cuckoos children look very evil in the film, but they aren't so evil in the original story. No, sometimes one gets an idea thrown at one. The original Triffids one, I think, came one night when I was walking along a dark lane in the country and the hedges were only just distinguishable against the sky, and the higher things sticking up from the hedges became rather menacing and felt that they might come over and strike down, or if they had stings, sting at one. So that the whole thing eventually grew out of that. The moving vegetable would be a real menace.
Are you ever appalled by the fruits of your imagination?
I don't think I'm appalled. Once when I was younger, before the war, when I was trying to write ghost stories, I used to frighten myself pallid.
Yes, but you've got over that now.
Oh, yes. Well, these aren't frightening, I don't think. No.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Wyndham. Thank you.
I used to frighten myself pallid.
I know, it's lovely, isn't it?
Beautiful.
It's great.
So I would like to ask you, David, Your adaptation, Midwich Cuckoos, it's just gone up. We can watch it now. Margaret Atwood has talked about the influence, as John said, of Wyndham on her work. For instance, The Handmaid's Tale, the relationship between The Handmaid's Tale and The Chrysalids. I wonder how you felt, given that one of the major changes you've made to the Midwich Cuckoos is the extent to which you feminised it, because that's hardly touched on at all in Wyndham's original, how it felt about this distressingly relevant piece of TV being broadcast at the same era as the Roe versus Wade judgment.
Yes, and it's very strange because I think one of the most interesting challenges was to think about abortion, he does it in the book. He's very interesting in the book. I mean, there's a horrific section, isn't there, where a young woman attempts to terminate her own child in a very unpleasant way, or does she try and kill herself? I can't remember exactly.
She attempts suicide.
It's a horrific section, and in our version, we wanted to really. Well, essentially, we decided that the Hive should, in this case, be that populist voice that just absolutely refuses the woman's choice. And we just did it. We just told that. And it's a good example of how I do things. There's barely a line of dialogue in that scene, and I really like it. It's probably one of my favourites, that strange little scene in the clinic where these women who go in there with you thinking that they have free will and thinking they have the right to make that decision, and suddenly some strange force says, no, you don't. And of course, when we were shooting it, this hadn't happened yet. And then suddenly it starts to gets in the news. And suddenly there's this phenomenal force of political power in this scene. And that's, I think, where great science fiction writing, that's the proof of it, isn't it? That John Wyndham has suddenly landed right in the heart of contemporary America. And that scene will resonate in contemporary America in a way that it would never have done 5 years ago.
I'm totally fascinated by the extent to which these books seem engaged with what feels like a very topical debate, which we've talked about on Backlisted several times, the individual versus the mass or the state or whatever you want to talk about. It's written 60 years ago and it's picking up Rousseau and whatever, but you know what I mean. It's coming
Hegel.
round again and again and again, right? It's and actually, I felt that was one of the ways in which Wyndham came up shinier than I was expecting.
Yeah,
I mean, it's true because you remember when we were talking about it before the episode that Wyndham was sort of talked about in the same way that Golding was talked about back in the 50s and 60s, as not just as a science, but as a novelist of ideas, a serious novelist of ideas. And I think that's definitely something that's sort of not, because he was such a best-selling writer. I think he was read by kids, by adolescents in particular. But my hunch is that he hasn't been as read by people he's not seen as one of the great kind of literary storytellers of the second half of the 20th century in the way that Golding now is.
Well, we should mention this book that was published in 1956 called Sometime Never, which is a collection of 3 stories by now a trio of authors we've covered on Backlisted. Envoy Extraordinary by William Golding.
Yeah.
Boy in Darkness by Mervyn Peake. Consider Her Ways by John Wyndham. Published together for the first time.
Amazing.
None of those stories that appear anywhere else. What a fascinating example of how literary status settles or is misappropriated over time. That in 1956, those new authors, William Golding, Mervyn Peake, John Wyndham, could appear together and be seen as a group. Now, they all have different attributes and strengths, but David, I wonder whether you think, to bring this round, what is it about Wyndham that people could read now and really, really find relevant?
Well, the strange thing about Wyndham, which is unique and completely different to Mervyn Peake, for example, is I think he's so simple. And I think his simplicity, linguistically, in terms of the storytelling, how slimline, they're all tiny. You can read them in an afternoon if you really want to. You can't do that with most of Mervyn Peake. And I think that's I think that
indeed you can.
Amen, brother. We just made that episode. Yes,
thank you. So I think it's cost him and I think it's cost him in the way that the rise of literary fiction, in perhaps the sense that literary fiction should be about something that is around the style of language, linguistic, and his utterly pared back, almost made for movies feel to him. I think movies haven't helped him, strangely, because I think it feels like he's just writing prototypes for screenplays almost, and it's unfair on him because actually the ideas are really remarkable.
Today, their control reaches out into space. Tomorrow, will it girdle the globe?
There's nothing you can do to stop us. Leave us alone.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So
leave us alone.
It's time for us to say farewell to Midwich, its weird children, and to offer huge thanks to David for helping us to reevaluate a book which I think we all feel deserves its place as a modern British classic. To Nikki for connecting all our voices in an invisible but non-creepy way. And to Unbound.
Good luck with that.
And to Unbound for lending us the canary.
Oh, you can download all 166 previous episodes. Plus follow links, clips and suggestions for further reading by visiting our website backlisted.fm. And we're always pleased if you contact us on Twitter and Facebook, and now in sound and pictures on Instagram too.
You can also show your love directly by supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/backlisted. All patrons get to hear Backlisted episodes early. And for less than the price of a round in the Stone and Scythe, Lock listeners get 2 extra Lock Listeds a month. Our very own weekend cottage where we 3 take bracing woodland walks, gossip in the pub with disgruntled locals, and talk about the books, films and music we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight.
I so hoped you were going to say where for the price of whatever you get to join our hive mind as we repel all borders. Lot listeners also get to hear their names read out on the show as a mark of our thanks and appreciation. And this week's Parish Pump notice board contains the following names:
Jennifer Milo Shook, Jacob Wunsch, Andrew Hetherington, Sean Berry. And we're also delighted to welcome Susie Koo Wilson to our Guild of Master Storytellers, the highest tier in the Backlisted firmament. Thank you for your generosity to all our patrons. Huge thanks for enabling us to continue to do what we love and enjoy.
We'd like to thank David for coming on in our blind date. Not blind date in a Triffids way. That would be weird and strange. David, thank you so much. This has been brilliant. I found this completely revelatory going back to these books and thinking about them in a contemporary context. So thank you for giving us the excuse to do that.
I've absolutely loved it. And should you choose to keep it in, I found out that it wasn't the Isle of Man, but it was a place where they will be unmolested.
Unmolested.
They're taken away by air to a place that and I must have strangely and Freudianly taken the Isle of Man from the Triffids, as you were saying.
Yeah, well, Isle of Wight maybe. I don't know which one of the isles.
I imagined it as the Isle of Man. It's funny, isn't it?
Is there anything else you would like to say about John Wyndham before we wrap up?
It's just at the end of a long journey, because I wasn't sure. It was a long time thinking this would be amazing on screen. I ought to have said, I didn't see the film for years. The film was not a big thing around when I was a teenager, you see. So for me to have made the journey from the book to eventually the screen and then to come and talk about the book again, it's just been a huge pleasure. I do think he's a very idiosyncratic British classic talent.
Yes, I think it's very helpful to think of him in the bracket of Golding and Peake while being nothing like either of those writers, but we should pay him the same respect.
We should, because
I think they were right.
In the movies, Alfred Hitchcock is considered the greatest filmmaker sort of all time, and he's exactly the same. Lean, mean, malicious at times, but the rigor is unparalleled, and some of the thinking is magnificent. And Wyndham, for me, has that very English cut glass leanness.
Beautiful. All right, well, listen, everybody. Thanks, David. Thanks, John and Nikki. We'll see you in a fortnight. If for some reason you don't know what happens at the end of the Midwich Cuckoos, don't listen to this bit coming up. Okay, but otherwise, we'll see you next time.
See you
Bye.
Guys. If you prefer to listen to Backlisted without adverts, you can sign up to our Patreon. It's www.patreon.com/backlisted. As well as getting the show early, you get a whole 2 extra episodes of what we call Locklisteds, which is Andy, me, and Nikki talking about the books, music, and films we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight.